if something's not going to make me feel good while I'm eating it, and I realize that, it's helpful for me to either stop eating it, or I take a smaller portion, or because my body's just very sensitive to foods, I guess, that are outside my norm. And so, and sometimes, like, let's say I have a craving, and I want to have a cookie, and I gave myself, the permission to, indulge in that on the weekend. Sometimes that is just going to make me feel good. It may not be physically, but emotionally, it is going to make
Mhm.
me feel good. But it's, where's that fine line between,
Yeah.
okay, emotionally, this is going to make me feel good, but is eating it going to lead me down the path of more and more and more? But that again is when I ask myself, okay, if I go to have a second cookie, is this going to make me feel good?
Yes.
And that's kind of the phrase that I personally use, and it's helpful.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Reshape Your Health podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Morgan Nolte, and I am so excited to bring you a series of podcasts over the next month with one of our Zivli health coaches. Her name is Dr. Lydia Spirawk, and she is a gem. I met her back when I was the program coordinator for the geriatric physical therapy residency program, and she was one of the residents, and I just loved her immediately. And she worked, on her own. And then I said, hey, are you interested in being a health coach? And she said, hey, I was actually going to reach out to you and ask if you're interested in hiring anyone. So it was just this beautiful timing. And she really is such a lovely person, full of insights, and has some podcast experience. So she was excited to come on the show and just kind of have some nice casual conversations about topics that we feel are going to be really valuable to the audience. And today the topic is how to reduce emotional eating tendencies over the holidays. This is a big topic. This is going to air kind of right between Thanksgiving and Christmas. And we hope that you take some strategies away that you can plan ahead, but then also some strategies to be gentle on yourself if you do emotionally eat or overeat, so that you're not catastrophizing the situation and making the issue worse. So before we get into all of that, Lydia, I would love if you would just give us a little bit of your background, since this is your first of hopefully many podcast episodes, and share a little bit with our audience about who you are, why you went into geriatric PT, and then why you became a health coach.
Absolutely. First of all, thank you for having me. I'm so excited
Yes.
to be here and chat with you and connect with the audience a little bit more. So I am a physical therapist as well. After PT school, I completed a geriatric residency program, which is where I met Dr. Nolte, and I learned a lot that year. Learned so much, and I fell in love with the geriatric population years and years and years ago. It's just an area that is very soft in my heart. I don't know if it started with my grandma and how close I was with her. Um, at one point she was in a nursing facility, and she ended up passing away. And years later, I kept thinking, I wish I had known what I know now. I wish I had been able to be that advocate for her. And I think that's kind of what started and fueled my passion for geriatrics. And then as I've worked in this field, both at the residency and then after that, I realized how much of a health crisis we're in, especially regarding nutrition, lifestyle, and how significant and impactful that area is on someone's life, and what it means, what aging means to them, and what that looks like based off of your lifestyle. And so Dr. Nolte and I connected with that a lot during the residency program. And I ended up getting a health coaching certification, and it kind of just worked out that by the time you needed some more help with coaching, I was feeling ready to do some coaching, and here we are.
Yeah, it's been awesome. And I'm really excited just to expand, on your role
Mhm.
inside of Zivli, to
Sure.
be a little bit more of the front facing person with me on the podcast sometimes, to
Mhm.
bring your insights, because some people just have a way with words. I don't believe that I am one of those people, but I know that you are one of those people. And I still remember reading, you had to write a paper back in the residency, and I had to review it and read it. And I just remember the first line, right, left, right, left, right, left, right, left. I'm like, oh my gosh, she's a really good writer. She's very talented in this area. So I was really excited to help just kind of allow you to utilize that skill set with some content.
Yeah.
So let's get into today's episode, which is about
Yeah.
reducing emotional eating during the holidays. I don't know about you, but I would love to hear some of your personal experiences on emotional eating. I'll go first.
Sure.
I remember growing up, we'd have Christmas at my grandma's house. And we would have all the sweets, the cookies, so many kinds of cookies. And we would have the peppermint chocolate dessert. And I would go to town. I mean, I ate so much sugar as a child. No one knew any better. And I remember distinctly, I was running up the basement stairs at my grandma's house, and she hollered up or hollered down, "Morgan, if you keep eating like that, you're going to be as big as a house." And I was just like, oh, okay. I guess
Wow.
it's not good to be as big as a house. I guess my grandma would not accept me if I was as big as a house. Okay,
Wow.
that's interesting.
How old were you?
I think probably 8 or 9. It was
Okay.
really young, but I
Yeah.
remember it very vividly.
Yeah.
Um, and so I think that is kind of a memory that sticks in my mind about like eating
Mm-hmm.
too much. And I've shared this before, but a third of the girls in our high school class had some sort of eating disorder.
Mm.
I had exercise bulimia in high school for
Mm-hmm.
10 months just because I
Yeah.
wanted to be faster at track. So I like didn't have any sugar. I like
Wow.
swore off sugar. And then all of a sudden that just broke one day. And I went like on the other end and just
Right.
continued sugar addiction, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So for me, growing up, the holidays always meant so much food, and specifically so much sugar. We would get like, I don't know, like a Russell Stover's, maybe like a huge golden box of big
Mm.
chocolates every
Right.
single Christmas. Do you know the ones I'm talking
Mm-hmm.
about? And my
Yep.
brother and I would get our own. And so we wouldn't have to share. And we would just gorge, on
Oh yeah.
candy from Halloween, like through it felt like
Mm-hmm.
Valentine's Day.
Mm-hmm.
And looking back, I'm just thinking, wow, I wish my parents would have known better. I wish I would have known better, because it's a very hard habit to break.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So thankfully, I've been able to break it, and I help other people break it. But like, I know intimately the call of sugar,
Mm-hmm.
like the draw of sugar, the draw of nostalgic hunger during the holidays is so strong.
Yeah.
And so we'll talk about that a little bit more when we're deciphering like emotional versus physical hunger. But I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to know if you had any personal experiences of your own growing up with emotional eating or sugar around the holidays.
Sure. I think, well, listening to your story, the first thing that popped in my mind was I was a big candy cane girl,
Oh,
which
I did not like those.
and I don't really like them now, but back then I would get really excited getting those, those huge candy canes, like they're the size of your arm
Yep.
practically. And you'd get it in your stocking. And I mean, I can't even imagine the amount of sugar that's in one of those. Like, it's just massive. And I would be so excited, and I would get it and I would finish it quickly, probably quicker than I should.
Mm-hmm.
But aside from that, our bigger thing was growing up, we were a big food family. Like, we're just foodies. And I don't know if it's a Midwest thing. I don't know if it's just our family, but you know, we ended up making a lot of family Christmas traditions around food.
Mm-hmm.
And that can be challenging to navigate as I'm older, because it almost feels like, well, if we don't eat those foods, if we don't have those things, then it's not Christmas.
Mm-hmm.
We ended up doing a tradition where we would have Chinese food on Christmas Eve, and that's been a consistent thing, throughout the years. Then in the morning, we'd have cinnamon rolls, and my mom would make strata, and make it as we got older. Maybe we'd have a mimosa, and it's a whole week of just eating and eating and
Mm-hmm.
eating and eating and eating. And I don't really know what the breaking point was for me where I was like, okay, this is kind of a lot. I think it was a lot of different things in my past. when I was in PT school, I ended up wanting to train for a marathon actually.
Oh,
And I realized that once I got to the midpoint of mileage, 13, 14 miles up, I realized that I needed to fuel my body for the run versus like, oh, I'm running so I get to eat, right? That's what my
mhm.
mindset had been for a very long time. And I think around that point is when I started choosing to eat foods that made me feel good. And I realized that especially around the holidays, especially around, events that took me out of my routine when I was eating a lot of what I wasn't used to eating, it just didn't make me feel good emotionally, yes, but especially physically. My body is very in tune to eating outside of the norm. And so I said, we're going to experiment. We're just going to try and see, choose foods that make me feel good, whatever that means to me, and let's roll with it. And so I do feel like I have a better handle on eating during the holidays than I used to, but it's taken a lot of time and
Yeah.
practice. Yeah.
I think that's a really good point is time and practice. And
Mhm.
so I'm reminded of yesterday during office hours, one of our members wanted coaching because she felt like she got out of control on Thanksgiving. And
Mm.
I said, okay, great. Let's unpack that. Like, when
Yeah.
did you feel out of control?
Mhm.
And she said, when I got the second plate of food. And I said, okay, did you have
Mm.
dessert? And she said, I had a half of a piece of pumpkin pie. And I
Mhm.
said, my dear, that is not out of control.
Right.
That is actually, so you're doing better than you think you're doing, first of all.
Mhm. Mhm.
But listening to her language, I love as a coach, we get to be a mirror to
Mhm.
people's language. And she said things like, I was really crappy at this. And,
Mhm.
or I don't know if these were her exact words. I'd have to go back and look, but
Sure.
like, I totally blew it. I was way out of control.
Mhm.
It was another member, which we can talk about later. It was like a constant battle,
Mm.
you know, being around food all the time.
Mhm.
And I said, it's a battle because that's the language that you're using. You're
Mhm.
using aggressive battle like language and you're making it harder than it needs to be for your
Right.
brain.
Right.
And so I think a big part of this conversation about reducing emotional eating is taking a little bit of the emotions out of the food. Like you
Mhm.
said, it's like it's not the
Mhm.
holiday without the mimosa and all
Right.
these things. It's like that's fine, but can we bring a little bit more neutrality to the language that we're using in
Right.
our internal dialect? Because when we're
Mhm.
using things like, oh, I completely got off track or I blew it, um, that's what you're telling your brain. And then that elicits a feeling of guilt.
Mhm.
And so what I really explained to her was when you feel guilty or shameful about an eating behavior, it's because your attention is placed on a past event.
Mhm.
And when you're feeling worried or anxious about what you're going to eat, for example, at Christmas, it's because your attention is placed on an undesired outcome of a future event.
Mhm.
And so,
Mhm.
but if we can keep that attention in the present moment, there is no guilt, shame, worry, or anxiety in the present moment because right now you are
Right.
safe, you are enough, like it is fine.
Right.
And so I think that's a big part of this is learning how to be mindfully present when we are
Mhm.
eating and not
Mhm.
worried about the past or the future. So that
Right.
was kind of one big takeaway was really using a little bit more neutral language around your food and your behavior for food, um,
Mhm.
but then also staying mindful and present. And that's definitely something that has helped me. But have you used that in your own life to like, how do you practice mindful eating during the holidays? How do you not like dwell on the past or worry about the future?
Right. For me personally, what I end up doing is I get very present. I try to get very present. So for example, let's say I walk into a room and we've got trays and trays and trays and trays of cookies. Um, in the past, it would be very easy for me to just eat everything because it was there, right?
Yeah,
You're just like, "Oh my gosh, look at all the cookies. I
totally.
wanna try
One of
everything."
each. Yeah.
Right, right. Um, you know, I've become a little bit more intentional with why am I eating it and do I really want it? You know,
Mhm.
and I've applied that principle into actually a lot of areas of my life. I'm not a minimalist by any means, but I like a lot of their principles, the idea of value-based spending, value-based eating, eat if I'm choosing to have something because it brings me happiness, I'm going to be very intentional about that. You know, I'm like, oh, I am a sucker for chocolate. This is true. I love chocolate. You know, so I would rather be intentional with, I'm going to have this cookie because it does bring me some happiness, and I am not going to have any shame about that, but I don't need to have taste all the other cookies, right?
Mhm.
And so I don't know. I don't know if that answered your question or not, but
Yeah.
I do try to get present and intentional in the moment as well. But I think it's also good to have a plan to kind of not pump the brakes, but to help you in the moment be like, oh, wait, is this what I really want to be doing? You know, and not in a shameful way, but just as a little reminder of, oh, maybe I'm not actually hungry. I don't need to be eating this right now, you know?
Hmm. I think the pumping the brakes, counting to 3 before you eat
Mm,
anything,
mhm,
is a habit I'm trying to instill. It's
mhm,
definitely not there yet, but like every single morning I say I count to 3 before I eat.
mm,
And this was a tip given by someone who's going to be on the podcast in 2024
yeah.
during our interview. And he said, but as you as you practice that, you can continue to expand that time between, we'll talk about the emotional eating cycle,
Mhm,
but essentially between craving and response.
mm,
And I think maybe this is a nice time to review that so that we
mhm,
get really clear on what those cues are. Because for you, a cue obviously is going into a room with all those cookies,
mhm,
and you're having the emotional awareness to be
mhm,
present and to make an active, present choice.
right.
But I think what's super helpful this time of year is for people to think proactively and proactively
Mhm,
set their boundaries around, especially sugar and alcohol. Like I
mhm,
will allow myself to have one standard size piece of dessert, or I will allow
mhm,
myself to have one drink with dinner,
sure.
something like that. And I think, like you said, it's like figure out like the nudge or the cue to say, do I really want that? Because I
Mhm,
think if you have that preset boundary and then you do it, but then you're going for the second piece of dessert, that's kind of a little prompt in your brain to be like,
mhm,
hey, Morgan, you said you were just going to have one.
right,
Do you really, really want this?
right.
Is this emotional eating?
Mhm,
So when we're talking about emotional eating, it's important for everyone to understand their emotional eating cues. And the member that said I got off track, I was out of control. She said, I've been great for like the last 2 months.
mhm,
And then I haven't been overeating. And then all of a sudden I did. I said, that's because your cues changed. The foods that
mhm,
are available to you changed. The people around you changed. The environment changed.
mhm,
So I think if we can get kind of granular on our own emotional eating cues, that might be helpful for people to start speaking to themselves and say, what are mine? So
sure.
I'm a really visual person.
Mhm,
And so if it's out of sight, it's likely going to be out of mind in my
mm,
house. And so
mhm,
I'm very aware to control my environment to keep unhealthy or like sugar laden foods out of sight.
mm,
For example, like my kids' Halloween bags are not just on the counter, they are in the cupboard up high
right,
where they can't reach them.
right.
If we have, dessert or something, it's in the freezer behind other things so that every time
Mhm,
I open the freezer, I don't see it.
mhm,
But for me, so sight, like the visual things are very important to
mhm,
control in my environment. If I can't control my environment, I can control where I look. And that's
mhm,
another little thing that I use a lot on Halloween, for example.
mhm,
Like where I don't know if you've heard this quote from Tony Robbins. It's like where focus goes, energy flows. Well, if I'm focused on that Twix bar in my daughter's trick or treat bag, like that's where my attention's going to go. That's where my
sure.
energy's going to go. I'm going to want it more and more. But if I just don't look at the candy, I
Mhm,
reduce that visual stimuli. If I look around, if I look at the decorations, if I look at the costumes and all of that stuff, then I'm much less likely to be cued to want the candy.
right.
But the other thing for me is emotional states. And
Mhm.
as a new
That's a
mom,
big one for me.
as a
Mhm.
new mom, I'm sure you can relate, but
Oh, yeah.
after the kids were in bed, like I went for popcorn a lot, like
Mhm,
especially after Dawson was born and I didn't have this stuff really dialed in as well as I'd like.
mhm,
Every night I'd be having popcorn and chocolate chips, an extra
right.
probably 400 calories at
Right
night,
before bed, right.
right before bed
Mhm,
of stuff that I didn't need. And what I realized was the cue of like getting him down in bed, walking into the kitchen area, that first deep breath, that feeling of like, oh my gosh, it's time to unwind. It's my time.
You're just describing everything that I feel most nights.
Yes. Yeah, it's true. And that's a cue. And so
Mhm.
I think that was a big one for me. Also, excitement is a big one
Mm.
for me. So if I get like I love a few of my cousins. And so
Mhm.
when I get around them, I get very excited and I augment that with
Mm.
the dopamine hit from sugar.
Sure.
So I think that's another reason people often overeat in family situations is they're happy. Like they
Mhm.
want to augment
Mhm.
that happiness. They want to feel as good as they can.
Right.
Uh, and so I think we sometimes use food for that.
Mhm.
Um, thankfully, loneliness, depression,
Mhm.
anger, those aren't emotions that I experience a lot, but I know
Mhm.
those emotions can be very activating for some. They
Sure.
can be cues for some. So
Sure.
those are my big ones. That'd be
Mhm.
excitement, that feeling of like, oh, it's me time,
Mhm.
and then visual stimuli. So what are your
Mhm.
specific cues for emotional eating?
So I think I agree with the that kind of like the sigh, the relief. For me, by the time I get Marlo down for bed, my cue is I go and I sit in my chair in the living room, and the moment I sit down, I'm like, oh, do I want my little chocolate bar? And it's like, no,
Yes.
yeah, I don't want my little chocolate bar, but it's that habit that I created over and over and over again. And, I'm more aware of it now, and I don't I'm not successful every night, but
Yep.
I'm better than I used to be. And it's hard too because while you're breastfeeding, all your hormones are crazy and then you're starving and
Hmm.
that's just crazy and wild in and of itself. But I agree that kind of that relief, that sigh. We're a big wine family. And so I think sometimes too at parties we'll be like, "Oh, I'll pour you a glass," and you have that first sip, and you're like, "Ah, ah."
Hmm.
So I would say that's definitely one for me. Um, excitement slash not community, but just like family involvement. So
Hmm.
we're a game family as well, and so when I'm at especially my mom's side. So when we're at my mom's house, around Christmas time, we'll put several like charcuterie boards in the middle of the table. And then we all gather on the table and we're playing games and we're laughing and, we're having a good time. And that I find very hard for me to not just keep eating and keep eating and keep eating because the food is right there. I'm
Yeah.
feeling good. I'm with my people that bring me the most joy. Um, so that would probably be my other one. And then for me, stress is also a
Yeah.
a big cue for me. I'll give you an example. Yesterday, I drove to my mom's. We have a car that's one of those remote start not remote starts, push starts.
Hmm.
I hate push start cars. I hate them with a dying passion. I want the key in there in the ignition. That's what I prefer. Anyway, we were trying to get out of the house. Marlo's screaming, yada, yada. I'm packing everything in the car. I asked my husband, hey, can you go start the car for me and warm it up for her? He says, I give him the car or the keys. Yep, that's fine. We get to my mom's and I shut the car off and a little thing comes up on the dashboard of key not found. Do you do you want to start the car again? And I'm like, what do you mean the key's not found? Turns out my husband did not put the key back in the car.
Yeah.
So now my car is just a sitting duck in my mom's driveway. I can't go anywhere.
Because you don't have the key.
I
For
don't
people
have the
who don't
key.
know, this is the craziest thing. If you start the car with the key in the car, because you have to have like this little, remote
Mm,
key to push the
right.
button, and then you can go somewhere, ironically, even if the key is not in the car.
Right, right. So I
Yes.
called my husband. He's like, how could you drive?" I'm like, "I don't know. It just let me."
Yep.
So I get inside the house. I'm very stressed out. And my immediate response, and my mom's house tends to be a house filled with lots of snacks. Um,
Mhm.
and so it's easy for me to eat more than I may not normally eat when I'm home. And so I come into the house, I'm stressed. And my that it was that cue of walking into the house. I was like, okay, what can I have that's gonna make me feel better? And I'm like, "Oh, Lydia, let's pump the brakes and actually think about this." I had put one of those Kirkland protein bars in my bag,
Yep.
to eat when I got there, and so that's what I pulled out. And I actually was hungry. I hadn't eaten in several hours. And I had that. I had calmed down. I was satisfied. I was good.
Yeah.
But if I hadn't put a plan in place with the stress, the cue of everything, it could have been a rough afternoon.
Yeah. But that's a good point, is having a plan in place,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so we can
Mm-hmm.
absolutely talk about that on how do we create those plans. But I
Mm-hmm.
think before we even do that, we have to identify the cues,
Yeah, that's
because
step
I think it's
one.
important. Like, another really good example from office hours yesterday was someone who, she had her children home for
Mm-hmm.
the holidays, and she's like, okay, I put all my energy in towards that Thanksgiving meal, but I
Mm-hmm.
also had to cook, like, I don't know if it was I think Friday, Saturday, Sunday, or something like that, 3 other
Mm-hmm.
meals, but she didn't really plan for those. And so
Mm-hmm.
she had gone out to a family event, and then she said, I kind of just like lost control at that family event because I was kind of at my wit's end. Like, I
Yeah,
just, like, her willpower was kind of burnt out, or
sure.
I don't know how she said it. And I said, well, next time your kids are there for Christmas, I think it might be a really good solution to cook meals ahead of time. That's what
Mm-hmm.
my mom did this time, because she hosted my brother's family. So she knew she was going to have people to eat. So she
Right.
made like spaghetti and she froze that, and she made tacos and she froze that,
Mm-hmm.
so that when she was responsible for those meals, it was a lot easier on her.
Right. That's
So I
smart.
think, yeah, like figuring out, okay, if Thanksgiving didn't go exactly as you would like, what were those sticking points? What
Mm-hmm.
stressed you out? And how can you plan ahead for the next holiday? That's kind of like reflection for action.
Yeah, I think that mindset shift is huge too. Viewing, not viewing a holiday that didn't go as well as you'd envisioned it going. Don't view that as a failure. Pick out the wins from there. Even if the win is I'm learning from
Yep.
the actions that I took, and that's okay. And I'm going to apply that into the next holiday.
Yes, I think that that's just perfect. And that's why one of like our core values that we want
Mm-hmm.
people to adopt is growth, because
Mm-hmm.
when growth is a core value, you don't fail, you don't
Right.
mess it up, you don't blow it, you don't screw it up, you're not crummy at anything, you're just
Right.
learning,
Yep.
and everything's a learning opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I think that's a really good conversation on the cue. Now, if we're
Mm-hmm.
following the emotional eating cycle, the next one is the craving.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think a lot of people don't pay enough attention to this step. They go immediately from the cue to
Mm-hmm.
the response. And so when we're talking about, well, what is a craving? Like for me,
Mm-hmm.
I get it right now, even just talking about sugar. And my tongue tingles.
You're
I
like, you're
start
salivating.
salivating. I'm salivating. I'm fantasizing things in my head.
Mm-hmm.
So you might get images of, and think about those pictures that come into your head.
Mm-hmm.
But then I think it's also important, if we are able to do this, we can also give ourselves like a negative craving. So
Mm-hmm.
for people that overate over Thanksgiving, I think that's excellent negative reinforcement, that
Mm-hmm.
how did you feel when you overate?
Right.
Right?
Right.
Were you bloated? Did you have less energy? Did you have to go sleep on the couch instead of engage with your family? Did
Right.
you have a bunch of joint pain the next day from the inflammation?
Mm-hmm.
Were your sugar cravings so much worse? All of these
Mm-hmm.
things. So I think when you see that cue and you automatically get that craving,
Mm-hmm.
that's an automatic response. That's a
Mm-hmm.
physiological response. But we can then choose to have a different response
Mm-hmm.
to that craving. And the response can be, hey, instead of just giving into this craving like you wanted to yesterday at your mom's
Mm-hmm.
house, what am I going to choose to think?
Mm-hmm.
So I want you to walk me through, like you kind of just did yesterday at your mom's house. You're like, hey, Lydia,
Mm-hmm.
this probably isn't the best choice. Like, you brought a
Mm-hmm.
protein bar, go eat that. Is that kind of
Right.
the dialect that went on?
So I walked in, set Marlo down, brought my stuff in. There's old Halloween candy on the
Yeah.
counter. And for me, I don't even know if it's like a sweet thing. It's more of just like, if it's something that I don't normally eat and it's there,
Yeah.
then I'm like, okay, I want or need to eat it.
I want that. Yeah.
Right, I want that. So I saw that. I kept walking, put all my stuff down, and in the process of unpacking, that's when I unpacked my protein bar, and then I said, "Oh, I actually am hungry. I'm gonna choose to eat this."
Mm-hmm.
For me, I also try. I'm not perfect with it, but I try. I try in the moment to ask myself, "Is this going to make me feel good?"
Mm-hmm.
Because again, for me, if something's not going to make me feel good while I'm eating it, and I realize that, it's helpful for me to either stop eating it, or I take a smaller portion, or because my body's just very sensitive to foods, I guess, that are outside my norm. And so, and sometimes, like, let's say I have a craving, and I want to have a cookie, and I gave myself, the permission to, indulge in that on the weekend. Sometimes that is just going to make me feel good. It may not be physically, but emotionally, it is going to make
Mhm.
me feel good. But it's, where's that fine line between,
Yeah.
okay, emotionally, this is going to make me feel good, but is eating it going to lead me down the path of more and more and more? But that again is when I ask myself, okay, if I go to have a second cookie, is this going to make me feel good?
Yes.
And that's kind of the phrase that I personally use, and it's helpful.
Yeah. I think also what you did a nice job of is reflecting on emotional versus physical hunger. And I
Mhm.
think we can bring that into the conversation.
Mhm.
So in the emotional eating cycle, there's the cue, there's the craving,
Mhm.
there's the response. And I think one response should always be, is this emotional hunger or is this
Mhm.
physical hunger? And so
Mhm.
you tuned into your body. You said, no, it's
Mhm.
been several hours since I've eaten. I'm
Mhm.
actually craving protein.
Mhm.
I think that's a big, emotional hunger, I think is pretty easy to recognize.
Right.
It's like you want it now, you want the sugary or
Mhm.
the salty things.
Mhm.
You maybe didn't really want food until you saw the food. I think
Right.
that's another good way to put it. You weren't really
Right.
hungry until you saw
Then
it,
all
and
of a
then, oh, I
sudden.
am hungry.
Right.
Yeah. I think nostalgic or conditional or learned
Mm.
hunger is really important to recognize. So,
Mhm.
I tell this story. I've told it on the podcast, like going back to the cabin where my grandma lives in
Mhm.
Ogallala, Nebraska, at Lake McConaughey. I'd really done a nice job dialing in my eating habits at home. And then when that environment changed, oh my
Mhm.
gosh, all of a sudden I wanted those M&Ms again, and I
Right.
wanted homemade ice cream and chocolate sauce, and I wanted Diet
Mhm.
Coke. And I'm like, who am I? Who is this? But I just realized it's a different environment.
Right.
You're being exposed to cues from your childhood, which
Mhm.
triggers that nostalgic craving, the nostalgic
Mhm.
hunger.
And that's
So
huge. That's a
huge, especially this time of
huge.
year.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and like you said, I think it's okay to eat out of nostalgia, but
Mhm.
does 1 make you feel good emotionally? Okay, but does 2? Does
Mhm.
3?
Right.
So
Right.
really continuing to reassess, like, is this going to make me feel good?
Mhm.
And I think the other thing is, learned or conditional hunger. You brought something up earlier about sitting on a chair
Mm.
and wanting a
Mhm.
chocolate. So the
Mhm.
chair, people don't often, associate environments themselves as
Mhm.
cues, but think about like a movie theater.
Right.
Right? You're gonna want popcorn at the movie theater. You're gonna want
Right.
sunflower seeds or peanuts at the baseball
Mhm.
game or a hot dog.
Mhm.
If you're going to a Husker football game, you're probably gonna want a Runza or a piece of Valentino's pizza. Those are conditionally learned hunger
Mhm.
behaviors.
Mhm.
And I think bringing awareness to those is really helpful for people to understand, why am I craving this right now? I didn't
Mhm.
want Valentino's pizza before I came in the stadium, but I do now, I guess.
Right.
So I think that's really important to assess and to plan ahead. Like,
Mhm.
I'm going to plan ahead as much as possible to fuel my body so that I, stay healthy, feel good over the holidays.
Mhm.
Man, I have to tell you this story. We were shopping in Walmart, um, and there was this older gentleman behind us, and yeah, I saw in his cart he had some, like, Walmart pies and
Mhm.
something else, and
Mhm.
he was like, "Oh, yeah, Thanksgiving, it's gonna suck." And I'm like,
Oh,
"What? Why?" And I thought maybe he's gonna be lonely or something like
yeah.
that. He's like, "Oh, I'm going to my kid's house. There's gonna be food, 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 and then I'm gonna be sleeping for the rest of the day." And I'm like, "Yeah, that does
Hmm.
kinda suck, but I'm like,
Right.
that doesn't have to be your reality."
Right.
And so I think if that's what people are feeling, like, "Oh, it's food, 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 and then I'm just
Mhm.
drained and tired," and, like, that doesn't have to be your reality.
Right.
Be the thermostat in the room, not the thermometer. So what if your
Mhm.
family doesn't eat like you wanna eat? Eat
Right.
like you wanna eat. Be the
Mhm.
thermostat, and you will eventually have such a positive ripple effect on your family that they will thank you for it. But I think
Right.
that's really tough, Lydia. Like, you kinda said you come from a family of foodies.
Mhm.
Do you feel like you're kind of a lone wolf in your family when it comes to food?
Yeah, it's interesting. I Sometimes I feel like because I my lifestyle is a little bit different, um, so in good ways, I think that I inspire my family, but I also think that I think I make not make them uncomfortable, but I think sometimes even my presence and maybe my non-participation in some of the eating makes them think, well, why is she doing that? Why, if she's not doing it, why am I doing it? But in
Mhm.
it, and for better or worse, I think it's easy then for them to, not peer pressure, but it's easy to be like, well, come on, just try it, just have a drink, and that kind of goes into boundaries. And that's an area that I am really exploring the last couple of years, especially since I, gave birth and this is my first child. And, um, you know, not going against, but changing what you used to do or what your family expects from you. It's tough, and setting boundaries with other people and with yourself. It's very challenging, especially around the holidays, when you're used to doing things a certain type of way, and you don't want to hurt anyone's feelings, and you don't want to cause any drama.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so in and of itself can cause emotional eating.
Exactly. I was like, that can
Right.
be a cue that
Right.
that attention or
Hmm.
confrontation, that
Hmm.
stuff can cue emotional eating for sure.
Right. Right. So I think for me, I try to be the person in my family that I don't necessarily restrict, but I try to add, so I'll be the one to bring the fruit and veggie tray, or I'll be the one to um make the mocktail, or I offer some alternatives that I know I would prefer to eat, and so it's there if other people want to eat them too. But yeah, it's hard because sometimes I get the comments of, oh yeah, there goes Lydia again doing her own thing. And
Mhm.
in the past I think that used to be triggering, a little upsetting for me, and so then I would just go down my typical rabbit hole of eating whatever I wanted and then not feeling good. And it's taken a lot of inner work to be like, you know what? That's okay. Their opinions and thoughts aren't really my business. I'm going to choose to, do what feels good for me, and that's okay.
That
But
emotional boundary around what other
mhm,
people think of you and not,
right,
I think it's so powerful to tell yourself every day, I don't fear criticism. I don't fear
mhm,
missing out. I don't fear
right,
judgment. Because those underlying emotions drive
mhm.
so much eating behavior that we
Oh
don't
yeah,
even realize it.
so
So,
much.
oh my gosh, just even just missing out, I think especially around the holidays, I don't fear
Hmm.
missing out. And
Hmm.
when you're faced with that cookie that, oh, that looks good, I want that. Oh, but I don't fear
Right,
missing out.
right.
You're able to self-talk so
Hmm.
much faster when you prepare your mind mentally. And we have
Hmm.
some really good episodes coming out about mental mastery and all that stuff too.
Hmm.
But I think that's a really important thing. And, I think a big conversation that we're going to be having over this, month-long series is attachment.
Hmm.
Um, if we can practice non-attachment,
Hmm.
emotional eating becomes so much easier. Like not emotional eating becomes so much easier. If
Hmm.
you're not attached to that nostalgic memory of having whatever food it is, you don't want the food. If you're not
Right,
attached to your Aunt Sally's opinion of whether or not you have her pumpkin pie,
right.
you're not going to care to have the pumpkin pie.
Right.
So really learning how to detach ourselves from the opinions or,
Mhm,
or the judgments or the perceived opinions and judgments of others is
mhm,
really powerful this time of year. I can't tell you how many times in coaching I'll be like, "Well, why'd you eat it if you didn't want it?" And I'm like,
mhm.
"Well, I didn't want people to like think bad of me and I didn't want to be rude." I was like, "Well, did they call you rude?" No.
Right.
That's all in your head, girl. Like
Mhm, mhm,
people I think people respect more and more and more healthy choices and are learning to respect more and more people's choices, even if they're
mhm,
different than their own. So, if we're kind of going through this whole emotional eating cycle again, right? We have the cue, the
mhm,
craving, the response. The last thing is the reward.
mm,
That's the tricky thing about emotional eating. Because as you said, yes, food does make us feel good. It does. Like, let's not lie about that. There's an
mhm,
actual dopamine response in the brain to sugar,
mhm.
makes us feel good, but too much doesn't. And that's a really
Right.
fine balance. So, from a reward standpoint, I think the tough thing about emotionally eating is the reward is immediate. It's an
Mhm.
immediate dopamine hit. You immediately feel good. But the reward for not emotionally eating is usually delayed,
Mhm. Yeah.
and we have a hard time as human beings delaying gratification.
Oh, yeah.
So, any thoughts on like the reward of either, good feelings or bad feelings or delayed gratification, or how we can really strengthen the reward to motivate ourselves to not overeat during the Christmas season or Hanukkah or whatever people celebrate this time of year?
I mean, I do think it comes back to what you said with the attachment and removing the attachment to the reward. I think I have to speak personally. I think if I eat something and it feels good, it just comes back to, okay, reassessment. How do I feel right now? Does this make me feel good? And so I think kind of consistently checking in with myself um, throughout that process and throughout that reward cycle, it helps me to just be in tune to how I'm feeling, right? If I have the reward, I'm really really excited, and then 20 minutes later my stomach's making all these noises and I'm really uncomfortable. um not feeling upset with myself that, oh gosh, look, you had this cookie and now you feel like crap sitting on the couch, but again, using that as, okay, that didn't really make me feel good, so I'm going to not choose to have another one, and that's okay. But I think it's bringing awareness and doing some kind of reflection and action of how you are feeling in the moment. That immediate response to the reward, and then as it kind of teeters down, how am I still feeling? How am I feeling now?
Yeah. I
Yeah.
think that's really good. I think also, when it comes to the reward, I think part of our Zivli process is really teaching people to do that daily mindset routine
Mhm.
and celebrating their wins, like
Yeah.
non-scale victories. I was like, oh, yay, I lost half a pound. I was like, whoop-de-doo. How
Right.
are you feeling?
Right.
What were your choices? How are your
Right.
emotions? And so I think if we get in the regular routine of praising ourselves and of
Mhm.
really feeling that, I think
Mhm.
that can be a reward in and of itself. Okay, good job, Morgan. Like you stopped after one cinnamon roll. That was your plan. Super
Mhm.
proud of you. Like, let's move on with the day. You
Right.
know, put the cinnamon rolls away, give your brain really clear instructions. But if we can praise ourselves, I think that's a reward.
Mm.
But with one of the members yesterday, I said, let's get a reward set in place where if you stop at one plate of food,
Mhm.
which is her goal for Christmas,
Sure.
what is your reward?
Mm.
Are you going to get a pedicure? Are you going to get a massage? Maybe buy
Yeah.
yourself a new top. Um, do something nice for yourself. If this is a
Yeah.
really big goal for you, then plan a reward ahead of time. And then I think one of the best tips is pay for it ahead of time. So,
Oh.
so like if you can really dial in your eating and then have a massage booked in like the first week of January to reward yourself,
Right.
because that's a reward. It's a delayed reward, but you've already paid
Mhm.
for it. You've already committed to it. You already have skin in the game. So I think that's kind of a
Hmm.
little tip too. And it can be something small, a new pair of gloves or a new hat or something like that. But
Right. You
having
know,
some reward that's bigger than the sugar reward.
yeah. No, I like that. I don't think I've thought about it that way before. But I think that's powerful, especially already kind of setting the reward in place, because I think it's really easy if you're like, oh, I'll buy myself a new pair of shoes if I don't do this. And then the moment happens, and then I, the plate of food is in front of you. And that seems way more enticing than, yeah, in a couple weeks I'll buy a pair of shoes,
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
So,
So we have to figure out how do we delay that gratification
mhm.
and how do we make that gratification something that's not food?
Right, right.
Um, I think another reward this time of year can even be like going and playing with your grandkids. Like go
Hmm.
initiate a game with your grandkids instead of
Right,
having a second piece of dessert.
right.
Go for a walk with your adult children. Like
Hmm.
figure out how maybe the reward can be more intentional quality time
Mm.
around your
I like
family.
that. Yeah. I use the verbiage, I get to a lot. And I use that when I was training for the marathon, and I'm like, all right, Lydia, I get to run 16 miles today. Yes, let's do this. And it's helpful though, when you're
Yes.
shifting that internal, dialect to, I get to do this, right? And so thinking, I eat my plate of food and then I get to go on a walk with my grandchildren,
Yeah.
and then reflecting in that moment of, I think bringing awareness to your surroundings, to how you're feeling. I feel my body and now I get to use my body to, walk, see the environment around me, listen to my grandchildren laughing. I look at all of these things I get to do because I fueled my body. Now I'm fueling my soul and, viewing, viewing that reward even bigger than something physical.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I
Yeah.
really like that. And I think to wrap up this conversation, I wanted to talk about some food stoppers. I think that's so practical. But I also want to remind people to go back and re-listen to the Healthy Holidays workshop,
Mhm.
maybe fast forward to whatever part you feel like is applicable. I don't think we put timestamps in the podcast, but there is in the YouTube version of it. And we're going to link that blog post below so people can kind of get a refresher. But some of my favorite food stoppers that I use all the time are brushing my teeth,
Mhm.
chew a piece of gum, get a glass of hot tea or decaf coffee. So after
Mhm.
the meal, and like if you've had your piece of dessert or whatever you decided to allow ahead of time, then you can have a second plan, right? So like have a
Mhm.
plan for after the plan. So
Mhm.
after dessert, I'm going to go get a cup of decaf coffee. After dessert, I'm going to go brush my teeth. After dessert, I'm
Mhm.
going to do this. And I think sometimes we stop the plan at the dessert or at the meal and we
Right.
forget that like there needs to be a stopper on the end of your eating plan.
Mhm.
What are some of your favorites?
The brushing the teeth one is great for me because once I brush my teeth, I don't like getting my teeth all dirty again.
I know we're so lazy. We don't want to
I
brush our
know.
teeth.
I know. So that one works for me. I also, um, I if I'm like let's say I'm at a Christmas party and I don't really know a lot of people and I have to go around and mingle, which is not normally my go-to. I'm more of a one-on-one person, but it's easy for me almost out of not nerve but just anticipation to easily go in. Okay, I'll get a plate of food and I'll get
Me
another
too.
plate of food and I'm walking around and I'm eating this food.
Me too.
So I have to physically be holding my cup with me
I like
and
them.
I mean, I have my water bottle right here. I'm a big water person. So, get your drink of choice, assuming it's something good and physically having it in my hands, not even setting it down. Cause if I set it down, then I'm going to walk away. Where's my water? I don't know where it is. I don't know where I set it, but keeping it in my hand. And then I'm more likely to drink the water and then I'm not as full or not as hungry, as the night goes on anyway. So
That's
I
a
use that one a lot.
that's a really great tip. Yeah, don't put your drink down.
Yeah. Don't put your drink down.
It's an oral, but also a hand fixation. And
Hmm.
I totally, especially after COVID, I think that social anxiety.
Hmm.
I'm not a group person either,
Yeah.
which is because I lead a group. But I never enjoyed the bar scene because I'm like, I don't
Hmm.
know who to talk to. There's a lot
Right.
of people here. I just want to pick one person to focus
Right.
on. Um, I love that tip. Thank you for
Hmm.
sharing that tip. So I think a big takeaway here is don't just make your food plan, make your stopper plan. So what's
Hmm.
your stopper going to be?
Hmm.
Figure out what your emotional eating cues are, proactively create a plan around them. Figure out what the stopper and then the reward. If you want to take it a step further, like I'm going to stop eating and then I'm going to give myself a reward, either a reward for my something physical, something that feeds your soul, like you said.
Hmm.
But let's really thoughtfully think through this. Go back and listen to the Healthy Holidays workshop if you need a refresher. Any other tips from an emotional eating standpoint for the holidays that you wanted to share, Lydia?
Yeah. The only other thing I wanted to say is that, and we touched on this a little bit, but, once the holidays are over, when you're reflecting, if things didn't go the way that you may have planned for them to, don't try to not view it as, oh, the whole train derailed, right?
Yes.
The train didn't derail, the train just stopped, the train keeps moving,
Yep. You're not
Um,
starting over.
right, right. You're not completely off the tracks. You just, you stopped, you picked a few more people up on the train, and now you're going again.
Yes, that's a really good reminder. Thank you for
Hmm.
sharing that. I hope you guys found this episode valuable. If you did, shoot me a message on Instagram. I'm at Dr. Morgan Nolte. I love hearing the feedback from the episodes on what you guys find helpful so we can make more content like that. And we'll see you next week with another helpful episode and timely episode around really mastering our mindset and our internal dialect around the holidays. Thanks.